Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first eSpeak in a long time. This was unintentional, unexpected, but now it's pretty much just me. It was going to be a channel talking about all of esports, and I still plan on doing videos about all of esports, but definitely now I'd like to focus more on Counter-Strike, like was my intended purpose for my solo videos. I was really nervous about doing this video because I didn't think I'd be able to sustain, it long enough by myself to substitute a podcast length. But we're going to be talking about the ESL Pro League finals in Dallas that happened last week. It was kind of a big deal and it was kind of a turning point, like a bit in the pro scene. Like at least the standings have been changed quite a bit, and there was a lot of storylines going on at that tournament. So obviously the first one to talk about is G2, the winners of the event, the Frenchmen, the French super team that was pretty much formed out of the French shuffle in January or early February after the E-League Major, in which both of the French teams, G2 and NVS, performed poorly. This actually was, it was something that a lot of people probably didn't notice, but G2's performance in this event was the end of a worst to first story, because a few weeks ago, or several weeks ago, G2 was actually dead bottom of the ESL Pro League with a 0-8 record. Like, they were abysmal. And it was pretty laughable that both of the other French teams in the ESL Pro League, NVS, who supposedly had gotten the short end of the stick on the shuffle, and LDLC, the team that moved up from the lower Premier League, were both way outperforming G2. But after that point, G2 really turned it around and won almost every other match in their season and managed to squeak in to the finals past Astralis and FaZe and ended up winning. It was a worst to first story like the 2013 Boston Red Sox, which is pretty impressive, but it was expected. Like, they've been the favorites to win many events, and the only sort of big event that they've won before Dallas was DreamHack Tours in France, so they were definitely the favorite there. But there's just so much talent and firepower on that team where it was just weird how they didn't perform to that level up to that point. And the team that they played in the grand final North was disappointing again, especially in that final. The fact that they made it to the final is impressive. Good for them. They had a second place finish in a very big event, but still it wasn't as good as was hoping. They're always playing in the shadow of Astralis, and they never seem to be able to use the talent on their team, of which there is a ton, and the intellectual talent of their in-game leader MSL, and finally win a big tournament. They haven't won a tournament since last year when they were Dignitas in Russia. There was, I can't remember the name of the tournament, but it was a big deal at the time, and it was like, oh, Dignitas is finally coming into their own. And honestly, yeah, they haven't really done anything since then, which kind of brings up a question about the new fifth member of the team, who's AZ, who was traded to the team from FaZe. He has been there for a couple months or a month and a half, and he has been severely underperforming. Like, it's been very disappointing because he looked like such a bright star on FaZe, and it was he just hasn't been performing. I don't know what it is, but he very rarely has games where he even has a positive KD. He's filling in the support role of Rubino, but in all honesty, getting rid of Rubino was a terrible idea. Rubino says that he left on his own accord, but it's a very high possibility that that's not actually true, considering he just joined another team like almost immediately after, which is now Dignitas. So he's basically back on the team that he left, or at least the organization. But there's a lot of speculation about AZ's position security within the team, and there are a couple of prime players that could replace him. Of course, one being Valda, who was on Heroic. He was the star of Heroic. He's a very good player. He can do some nutty shit, and he was benched from Heroic, and everyone was wondering why. But then Heroic came out and said that he's benched because he's looking for other teams, or he was looking for offers from other teams, which is what really jump-started the speculation of him replacing AZ. But a little bit, I want to think that it's not really true, because AZ hasn't been on the team that long. It's like, it hasn't really seemed like it's been long enough for him to solidify in the roster, but it's just like there was so much hype around him joining the team and expectations that just haven't been met, even in this short amount of time. Another player that could replace him is Pimp, the other Dane who was on Liquid for a while, and he's currently without a team, but he's a very good player. He's a very good support player. He did that role in Liquid, and it'd be cool for him to play with his countrymen. So AZ's definitely a little bit on the hot seat. I think if he doesn't get removed from the roster sometime recently, he's probably going to be sitting on the hot seat for the next few months at least, until he starts performing or until he's removed. Another big storyline of the ESL finals was Team Liquid reestablishing themselves as the North American hope, possibly. There's a big question mark. Currently, it's like at least in the ESL Pro League, but in a lot of other events, it seemed like the top 3 North American teams, which are Liquid, Cloud9, and Optic, have been very even, like extremely, almost like really competitively even. Like any team, any one of them can beat any one of them at any given event. It just depends on who shows up. But this time, Liquid was pretty much the only North American team in the event that even did a good performance, and they made it to the semifinals, where they played against the eventual, they played against North, and it was a very competitive first 2 maps before they got kind of destroyed on the third map. But they do, especially with twists on the roster, they do have a lot of talent. They are kind of the North American super team at the moment, because the amount of talent that they've accumulated, as well as the intellectual prowess of Stanislaw, who moved over from Optic. So they seem like they should be the strongest team in North America on paper, but sometimes Cloud9 shows up and wrecks people, and sometimes it's Optic. So it's really up in the air at the moment, and that's one of the problems with North America in Counter-Strike currently. Cloud9 and Optic both had really disappointing results at the ESL finals. Neither of them made it out of groups, I believe. Yeah, Optic did end up beating NaVi. They have been improving steadily with Jason R as their in-game leader. Ever since they lost Stanislaw to Liquid at the beginning of the year, they've been trying out different players. It started with Hiko, and then they had Hazed, and then Jason R. And Jason R, he's a good player. He does some nutty shit. And according to Rush, one of the riflers on Optic, they say that he's been steadily getting better. He's been performing more and more at a professional level, and it showed. Optic performed pretty good at this event. They definitely could have done better, but beating NaVi was a good thing. I mean, it's honestly, like, because of NaVi's problems, it's not as impressive as it should be. So I'd like to talk about NaVi's problems now. Edward and Seized, I think, are probably on the hot seat for this team. Seized is the in-game leader, but he just consistently looks horrible. It was kind of a shit talk that I think Config did, or Cajun B. I can't remember who it was, but he called Seized the worst player in the world, playing on a team with Simple, who he said was the best player in the world. And while neither of those statements are pretty true in any sense, Seized has looked just awful for the longest time. I don't think I've ever seen a highlight reel of Seized, at least anything more than a 1v2 that he won. I can't think of any time where I was impressed with this play. He almost always had just an abysmal KDR and ADR. So I've been thinking, it's actually kind of a common thought that either him or Edward, who has been really up and down as well, might be replaced at some point by another player from Hellraisers, one of the other prominent CIS region teams. Someone not sure who the in-game leader is on Hellraisers, but they would probably be a prime replacement for Seized, because Seized actually took it up after Zeus left, and I think that was one of the problems. And then they lost their coach Starix whenever he became a player again and joined Team Spirit. So they've just seemed to have lost a lot of leadership in that team. Weird limbo state currently. They don't know, what to do. One of my favorite North American teams that's kind of understandably disappointing at the event. They've had a lack of results ever since on the team was replaced by Daps. Markey was kind of an explosive player. He had some bad reputation about him because he would do some really stupid shit in online matches. He would screw around. But he had one of those explosive talents that made the team much more threatening. And now that he's been replaced by Daps, who became their in-game leader, the teams just seemed extremely flat. Like Unbelay against Optic tonight, they just didn't seem to have an answer for anything on Mirage against Optic. There was nothing they could do. It was very, very unimpressive. But that was actually expected. I don't think NRG picked up a single win. One apparently was thinking that about NRG coming into the event. I was probably one of the only people that was actually hopeful about them. I was like, yeah, these guys can play well. They could cause some upsets, but nope, apparently not. Now I'm going to talk about my favorite team in Counter-Strike, Mousesports. They used to be the German team, but now they only have one German in the team. Now it's international roster, kind of these. I like to think of them as the poor man's phase. And they've been becoming increasingly competitive in the last few months. It's actually been really encouraging, especially after losing Nico at the beginning of the year, who was the best player. People thought that Mousesports was going to just fade into oblivion, but that ended up not happening. Initially they were pretty awful, but they picked up this onliner, Robs, who from FPL, I think he's a Estonian, and he's been phenomenal, especially online. In his first LAN, he was pretty good, but at this one, at Dallas, he was actually pretty impressive, and you could see that shining through. And Mousesports in this, I believe it was either the quarterfinals, and they lost to G2, who ended up winning the event. So that's actually it's still impressive. Chris J was put back on the roster. He was kicked off originally and replaced by Oscar, but he was put back on after Nico left, and he's been doing the in-game leading for the team. But he's been performing horribly. But unlike Seized, he has a lot of highlights. That's a big thing where it's he's not necessarily in much of a hot seat situation as Seized on NaVi would be, because Chris J can do some crazy stuff. He'll all the time, and it's that's why he's on a team. He has a lot of raw talent that can show. He could do occasional bad decision making, but his experience will help out with his in-game leading, and he has the raw talent to occasionally make an impact play. That makes overall. There's at the event there's been a slight shift in power, I would say. It's been a slight shift in power from Astralis and FaZe, because both of them missed the event because they both, didn't perform well in ESL Pro League at all. And it's been shifting more towards SK, because SKM Sydney and ESL Pro League Finals Dallas, and G2 or SK didn't win Dallas, but they were they went pretty far in Dallas, and G2 who won DreamHack Tours and won Dallas. So they're both probably in more contention for first and second place than Astralis and FaZe. We just have to wait until the next big tournament that has all of those teams in it and see what happens. As kind of a summary of the ESL season, or at least a story that involves the season but not the finals, Virtus Pro plummeting off the face of the earth. They were in relegation and they lost to Big and Penta, who, before like a couple months ago at least, like nobody in the world would have thought that Big and Penta could have beaten Virtus Pro. But Virtus Pro is just horrible right now, and they've been relegated to the Premier League, which is pretty crazy. Apparently this has happened before, and they did a rule change which allowed Virtus Pro to re-enter the league, which kind of pissed people off. But this time it looks like Virtus Pro is actually relegated for at least until next ESL Pro League season, or until after that season. And Big ended up Big, which is now the top German team, since Mousesports isn't really German anymore. Big managed to beat Penta and enter the ESL Pro League with Godsent, who won the Mountain Dew League. Godsent is probably the third best Swedish team, third or fourth best, and they can look good sometimes, but I've just not been impressed. I'm actually not sure how they won Mountain Dew League, because I haven't been impressed with any of their games in a long time. But Big, I'm very excited for, because I'm a big fan of the German scene and a lot of the players on that team, and I love fresh blood in the top levels. So I'm very interested to see how that works out. They're probably not going to do great, but if they perform admirably like LDLC did this season, which was LDLC's first season in the ESL Pro League, that would be great. Also about Virtus Pro, they're playing in this E-League Clash for Cash against Astralis in Atlanta. It's a rematch of the E-League Major Finals, where Astralis did this awesome comeback to beat Virtus Pro in the Grand Finals. A few months ago this would have been a good idea, but right now there's no doubt in my mind that Virtus Pro is going to be absolutely steamrolled by Astralis. Unless Virtus Pro right now is grinding the training or grinding the boot camp, there is no way they're going to stand a chance against Astralis with their current form. So one of the things that Duncan Thorin Shields, he's the e-sport historian, and he goes by the name of Thorin. One of the things he said recently was that he feels the CSGO pro scene is getting more and more competitive, and I have to agree. With that, because some of the teams that dominated last year, other than SK, have been kind of receding, and there have been a huge number of lower level teams that have been coming up to the top and playing better and causing more upsets. This has definitely been a lot more competitive season than I think I've seen, especially whenever North and Mousesports are the first two teams to qualify for the finals in the EU section of the ESL Pro League, and FaZe and Astralis, who are seen as the number 1 and number 2 teams in the world, don't even make it to the event. That shows that at least online almost anything is possible within the top 20 teams. Like, at least online. On lane is a different story. It's a little bit more traditional in terms of the older, more experienced teams being better. But surprises happen online, and that's how big teams like FaZe and Astralis can miss these bigger events, is by them getting, I don't know if it's complacency or they just don't care about online performance, and they end up missing out on a big event like this. So I'm really looking forward to next season with Big and Godsent and no Virtus Pro. it's really interesting, and LDLC returning. So that's definitely going to be really fun to watch, and I'm looking forward to the Krakow Major and ESL 1 Cologne. Hell, I'm even looking forward to this E-League Clash for Cash. I'm curious what would happen. I mean, I'm fairly certain Astralis is going to win, but we'll see what happens. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. It's kind of a podcast. It seems more of like my videos that I would do on my old channel about Battlefield, just, a lot significantly longer. So I enjoyed talking with myself. I don't know if anyone would find this entertaining enough to watch for the entire thing, but I don't know. So hopefully this means I'll start doing more Counter-Strike podcasts about different subjects, and I can start to get my name out there, because that's something that I really hope to do. So thanks for tuning in, and until the next eSpeak, this is Yummy, and goodbye.